Over 5 years ago in 2018, it was announced that the beloved animated show Avatar The Last Airbender that aired on Nickelodeon from 2005 to 2008 would be getting a live-action adaptation on Netflix. And I was excited, because Avatar is an incredible show, a genuine achievement in entertainment that left a huge impact on me personally, and also with viewers around the world. Regardless of whatever Netflix put out, the anticipation of waiting over 5 years to see one of my absolute favorite stories acknowledged, thrust back into the pop culture discussion, and retold in a new format was crazy.
No one's going to stand in my way.
I was always going to watch this show, but I gotta say, it's hard to compare anything to something you consider to be perfect in so many ways. Because to me, the original animated Avatar is so good, a benchmark, a peak that most other shows I watch will almost never beat. And while I think it's safe to say the original Avatar is really well done and respected, part of my outlook on it is definitely shaped by nostalgia, because I acknowledge it's not a perfect show, and I have criticisms, but I experienced it at the perfect age, and its story and its characters really made me feel the magic. I think a lot of us have those special pieces of entertainment that make us fans for life, whether it be a movie, a song, a show, or a book that when you revisit it, it can make you feel like a kid again. And you know, I gotta remind, as we get started, go ahead and leave a like on this video.
This is incredible. You will be involved in a great battle. An awesome conflict between the forces of good and evil. A battle whose outcome will determine the fate of the whole world.
Yeah, I knew that already. But did it say anything about a girl?
A girl?
Okay, so right off the bat, with my initial impressions, which could always change, and without trying to spoil anything, after watching the Netflix adaptation, I came away with a feeling that this was a very average TV show, which unfortunately may not be an opinion that anyone on the internet wants to hear, but while with most average things I watch, my opinion on it may simply boil down to a big fat meh. In this context, where I am talking about that thing I felt was average directly alongside something I passionately enjoy, then by comparison, a lot of what I say is going to sound hypercritical of that meh thing. That may not be entirely fair, but it is what it is sometimes. Because I actually felt like the people making this probably did care about the original source material, but just maybe didn't do the best job adapting it. You know, in a single binge watch of the show, I haven't quite figured out yet how they managed to use a similar amount of runtime as the original, hit the same story beats, but managed to water it down like they did. Maybe just having so many shorter, separate episodes in the original just makes it harder to adapt into 8 longer episodes, because you know, you do get quite a bit of character development in those quiet moments at the start and end of an Avatar episode, and I felt that missing here. And the creators of this Netflix show probably should have been less afraid to cut more things and just focus on what worked best for the story that they were trying to tell. As I already touched on, it did feel like the people making it cared. There's a ton of nods to the fans, and I get the sense that they really didn't want to cut any of the major story beats, and that might have been to its detriment in this situation.
Hey, watch out for my hill!
I understood that reference.
I know people will want to ask how it stacks up compared to The Last Airbender movie, the first live-action attempt at Avatar, which was widely considered to be really bad. And that movie failed because they did completely unnecessary things that seemingly served no purpose other than to bother fans. Well, hold on, let me backtrack on that. That movie has terrible writing and terrible acting. That is why it failed. But they just went ahead and rubbed that salt right into the wound, which I think cemented it instead of just as a, typical run-of-the-mill failure into an infamous, always cited failure by doing whack stuff like changing character names and messing with the fundamentals of how bending works. Like, what are you thinking?
Haha, hey, what's going on? Aang, it's Zuko here. Want to practice some bending? Haha, no, I'd actually just prefer that you call me by my real freaking name.
My name is Aang. And I'm the Avatar. I ran away, but I'm back now. It's time for you to stop doing this!
The Avatar would have to be an airbender. Are you an airbender, boy?
Leave him alone!
And to me, this isn't that. It's not offensively bad like the last Airbender movie was, but it doesn't capture the original's magic. It takes you to all those same places, but it doesn't do nearly as good of a job earning the moments. And I think it's also important to note that this isn't a one-to-one retelling. They definitely change things. And while characters and events typically lead us to the same place, overall, I don't believe the changes they made justify themselves. That's not to say all the changes they made were bad. Some were good, but these are exceptions to the rule, in my opinion. And so I think the point that I'm making here is that, yeah, the Netflix adaptation, it's fine. It doesn't stray too far from the original story. It's just not executed nearly as well. Because, you know, in many ways, it is a fun show. There's certainly pacing issues, and even though overall it has a similar time to work with as the original, the way they condense the runtime into 8 episodes, you often just feel like you're getting a rushed retelling of the story. The subtlety, the nuance, character depth, and the themes the original series explored so well are often removed in favor of force-feeding exposition and for characters to just blurt out how they are feeling and over-explain exactly what's happening at any given time. It doesn't always feel like people are having realistic conversations or dialogue. It feels like they are stating exactly what the audience needs to know in order to move to the next scene.
It's all the same drills. You know I already know all this stuff.
Aang, you may be more advanced than the others, but there's much you have to learn. And believe it or not, there may come a day when you wish you'd spent more time with your teachers. Now, you and the other students better go help set up for the Great Comet Festival. There's still a lot of work to be done before the air nomads from the other temples arrive.
When your king receives those plans, he will redirect his forces to your borders and rally the support of the other nations. The water tribes and the air nomads and the entire world will turn their attention to the earthbenders.
You wanted us to know. We aren't the real target.
Oh, yes, thank you for that. I would have missed it if you hadn't clarified. You know, actually, in some ways, an existing fan might get more to enjoy here than someone coming into the show blind. Because I feel like there's a bit of a setup and payoff problem with the Netflix adaptation, and when this show doesn't do the best job setting something up or explaining it, if you already know the original, your mind can kind of fill in those gaps or carry over those pre-existing character attachments. Because they kept a lot from the original, and when you reach those same story beats or payoffs, if you're a fan, you can still remember that added context from the original, and that makes those highs still feel high, even if the adaptation didn't earn it by itself. And from some of what I've seen, and if you look on Rotten Tomatoes, it seems like Avatar fans responded more favorably to this show than others. And unfortunately, I do think in some cases, these fans are overlooking the superficial nature of the adaptation because they're already so attached to the characters from before. Because if I'm being real, the Netflix show doesn't really earn that same level of love on its own.
Where's Aang?
In the original, it gives you just what you need in the opening to understand the world and then throws you in with the characters and really develops them first while building the world second. Here, I felt like they focused on building the world at the sacrifice of building our core team of characters. You get quite a bit of people telling you about the world, but you never go deep into the characters themselves. In the original, you get to know the characters first and then naturally find out about the world as their journey unfolds. And I feel like the Netflix creators may have fallen into a bit of a trap in loving that world so much that they focus too much on the world and not enough on the characters. For example, and this is a minor spoiler, but they've included it in the marketing materials, that the Netflix adaptation shows the actual destruction of the air nomads, something that they don't do in the original cartoon. And while in the adaptation, it's a decent action sequence, we spend very little time with the air nomads. We get some information on what airbenders are, we see sky bison, we learn there's a comet festival, but beyond expository points, not much is accomplished. So when the attack happens, something new that the adaptation is trying to add, it rings hollow. because we don't know who these characters are. There's not much stakes, you don't feel much. I kind of care because I have context from the original show, but the adaptation itself doesn't do the work to set that up and earn any emotional payoffs. We as the audience know that we are seeing firebenders attack air nomads. The world is set up, but who are these people and why should we care? I know what's happening on paper within this world, but why does it matter? And the show really tries to get you to care with the music and the slow-mo, but I don't know, it just didn't work as well as it should have. There are some stumbles with the acting, but you know, like the show, in general, it's fine. Most, not all, but most of the characters look the part. Looking at you, May. But I think Zuko and Iroh are the standouts in my opinion, and I think their storyline got the best changes in the adaptation too. There's an added dynamic between Iroh and an Earth Kingdom soldier I thought was interesting, and that funeral scene with Zuko and the change they made to his crew. Those additions led to new moments exclusive to the adaptation that I felt like it actually earned. I thought the Zuko actor did an excellent job bringing animated Zuko to life, capturing that angst. And even though they made some big changes to Zhao's character, I did also enjoy that actor's performance as well. He definitely had to do some legwork, making some clunky writing work. And then there's Sokka. He was another character I think they adapted relatively well. I was worried because if they weren't careful, his humor could have easily been cringe when making the jump from animation to live action, but I thought it still fit most of the time. Production-wise, I think they did about as good a job as could reasonably be expected. While I do think that everything, especially the costumes and makeup, looked too clean, most of the actual designs, sets, and locations were pretty good. You notice the heavy use of CGI, and sometimes the soundstage, whatever background they use, is distracting, but ultimately it did the job. It's not always the most convincing, but it rarely took me out of it. And I do think that's an accomplishment for a fantasy world like Avatar that you're translating into live action. And the bending looks pretty good. I have criticisms, but it's much closer to the way the animated series portrays it than something like the movie did. The music is pretty generic. I'm not saying it's bad or anything, but whenever they pulled in those familiar notes from the original show, it just highlighted to me how forgettable most of the new stuff that we were getting was, but that just may be the nostalgia glasses talking. All right, well, I spent a long time talking about things I wasn't the biggest fan of, but I think sometimes it's just the nature of how these kinds of discussions go, because I do think that there's stuff to like here, and it does remain mostly faithful to the source material, at least superficially. However, because of the writing and pacing issues, I cannot recommend this to someone instead of or over the original animated version. Looking at the story, you definitely lose something by only knowing the Netflix version. But look, if you're open to this kind of story, if you like fantasy, you could have yourself a good time with this. I also think that if for whatever reason you dislike animation, or maybe to you the original feels dated, the Netflix version could be for you. I disagree with those sentiments, but this version could be for you. And it's interesting to think that this show may capture new Avatar fans, a younger and older generation who wasn't around watching the show in the early 2000s on Nickelodeon. This may be their first and only experience with Avatar. And for that purpose, the show isn't necessarily what I would have wanted, but it's not offensive like something like the movie was. And if we're doing grades, if I had to pick a number out of 10, I think my initial impression is a 6, because again, I felt like this was generally a really run-of-the-mill average show, you know, like a 5 or something, but because the source material it's adapting is so good, I feel like it brings it up to a 6. I could see someone giving this a 7 or maybe even an 8, but if you're giving it an 8 or higher, I'm genuinely curious to understand how you get there. And largely, I've seen some pretty split opinions on the show, which honestly just makes me feel better about my average rating, because some people seem to really like it and some people seem to hate it. And I kind of landed in the middle, thinking it was consistently fine. But hey, hopefully it's only up from here as they greenlight a season 2 on Netflix. Overall, I wanted to like it more, but I am open to seeing what they do next. And hey, if you made it this far in the video, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel. Plus, drop a comment and share how you feel about everything. I hope that you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you next time.